All right.
Every time. But it's just, I like our music. It gets me going.
We need to
I
add
was
another
I,
10.
I was
We need to add
shaking my
another
head.
10 or 15 seconds.
I always worry people get bored or they'll
Anybody?
get so into the music by the time we start talking, they'll just be disappointed.
I was ready to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, if Carson was here, he'd be air guitaring and jumping around the room and all that stuff. So anyway, welcome episode number 137. Tom Burton here with Brandon Lee. Carson is in the mothership or at the mothership in Seattle this week, so won't be joining us. But we have yet another great guest, David Rosenberg. Welcome.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me.
This is going to be, we were chatting before, an interesting episode because we've not really talked a lot about market research, positioning, how you're perceived against others or other companies or other personal brands, all of that, which, some people may say, well, that's not selling, but I think it's integral to selling and integral to the success in selling. So really looking forward, David, to kind of doing that deep dive and understanding how we can all make us better.
I
And
am looking forward to sharing some good insights. It's funny. A lot of people mistake marketing and sales for being almost the same. They are symbiotic for sure, right? But the best sales and marketing teams work when marketing gets the right messaging with the right targets, but allows sales to provide lots of input and guidance into the types of tools that will work with that specific target audience. And that's been my experience, even in the pharmaceutical industry, all the way through, consumer packaged goods.
Yep. And David, I know, Tom, sorry, we're going to dive right in this, and I'll let you interrupt me when I'm done real quick. But what I heard you say there too is I think that the positioning and the messaging especially, is so important for helping sales create conversations.
Yes,
right?
yes.
It's so important to the sales cycle right now, especially because so many companies, so many teams right now. It's not that they're bad at sales; they're just not getting enough opportunities. And I think we're in a season, especially with so much AI and so much messaging and everybody just being bombarded with so many outreaches, that positioning and messaging really needs to be focused in order to stand out from the noise.
It's even more than that, honestly. And for folks who don't know me, I am David Rosenberg. I am the president and managing partner of a boutique marketing firm, market research firm called Woosh Marketing Consultants. We run under the DBA, Woosh Market Research. And we focus really on answering the biggest marketing questions. And there's 4 of them, like the what, when, where, and how questions. And that goes from product development to product positioning to personal branding, you name it. Those questions are always important to be asked, and it all comes down to perception management. And when you're talking about positioning, it's so much more than just getting it right. You can get the perfect message, but if it's not going to the right client and it doesn't have the right image or the right video length or the right video content in it, it doesn't have a clear enough message. There's a lot of ifs. It doesn't have, if it doesn't, if it doesn't. I can say about 15 more. It doesn't matter how good the product is or how good the initial message is. And that is where a market research firm like Woosh Market Research can really provide some guidance.
Well, yeah, and I'm saying here, I'm already, Brandon, thinking of going off script because there's already some other questions that have come in.
I love it.
Before we do that, first I want to welcome Bob and anybody else that's listening. Let us know you're here. Jump in, ask questions, comment. Also, Brandon, we forgot to mention that, as always, we're sponsored by Fist Bump, and to thank Fist Bump and the team for all their work to get all this going every week. Any upcoming events or shows that we should be knowing about?
No, we've been really focusing on our own research. I should probably learn from David a bit more, but just looking at what's going on with LinkedIn content right now, and how are companies that are standing out and getting those opportunities what are they doing different than companies that are frustrated and not getting those? So we have an executive brief. We got a couple, we've got a PDF, we've got a carousel post coming out on it, but it's really, really interesting. I think what's happening right now in content. And David, you probably speak to this too. I think a lot of what's going on with LinkedIn content, especially around leaders, it's uncomfortable.
Well,
It's different.
it's interesting because what's happened is there's been a dramatic shift in the past 18 months of the type of LinkedIn user. We just completed for a client a really kind of deep dive. So a couple interesting stats that people aren't familiar with. You see kind of the flavor of the month, but there's actually several hundred people that actually have millions with an M, millions of followers on LinkedIn that you never ever see. Or people that have literally every post they put out will get 30, 40, 50,000 impressions or more, sometimes hundreds of thousands, every single post that the three of us might ever see. And the shift is happening because the age of the average user globally has dramatically shifted down. By saying that, I mean, right now it's like 77.2, I think, with the exact number. So a little more than 77% of all the LinkedIn users now are under the age of 35. And in that crowd, there's 280,000 of them that are calling themselves personal branding experts or content writing experts. So what that means is there's a lot of noise out there. And so the shift is not just hooks, not just videos. And there's some people doing exceptionally well that have maybe a couple thousand followers. I don't have that many followers, but I get a lot of leads through LinkedIn. And our thinking is they're focusing on the wrong thing. Just raising your awareness, even getting 100,000 followers, is not going to be equal to getting even one request for a proposal. You got to
Yeah,
focus on the metrics that matter.
I've heard fairly frequently from people on LinkedIn that have large followers or get, a post that goes viral. They find that they don't get a lot necessarily out of the viral post from a lead perspective but if they get a really targeted, well thought out, highly valuable post that maybe reaches fewer people, the quality, right? It's quantity versus quality on the other side.
Well, what we found also in the research, and this actually was not that surprising to me because it's in the real world too sometimes, is the people that I call the LinkedIn lurkers. They don't ever post. Every now and then their engagement is just, clicking a like or clicking the love or clicking the support or clicking the celebrate. And that's their engagement. They don't ever write a comment. And they'll follow you for 3 or 4 months. And then when they feel like they know and trust, then they'll DM you with a project what happens often in my case for our company and my partners as well is what will happen is they'll get a request for a proposal specifically through the services offered on your profile.
Yeah, I think that is. I mean, what we've experienced, what we've seen with our clients, with my own, is that exact same thing. It's the messages that come in on a DM that say, "Hey, I've been following you for a while. I think you might be able to help us."
Yep.
And prior to that, you didn't really know they existed. Maybe occasionally they would like, but even then, a lot of them they're not liking posts. They're definitely not commenting on posts, and a lot of them aren't even creating content. They're just, I hate the term lurker. It seems so negative, but they're viewers, they're watchers, they're paying attention, and and that's where those that post and those that comment, you have this ability to build a reputation, to become known for something, to stay top of mind, so that they are able to go on their journey. Tom, there's an opportunity for you to talk about your book, but they can go on their journey in whatever crazy, wild direction it's going to go. But when they're ready, they generally have a couple people in mind who they're going to reach out to. And that's why a lot of the cold outreach is just falling flat.
Yeah, that's exactly true. We're experiencing exactly the same thing, and we hear almost verbatim what you just said is, "Hey, we've been following you a long time. There's a couple people I've thrown this proposal to. I want to get your feedback, and it's just going to be between you three, or stuff like that, or hey, can we engage you in 3 hours of just consultation, just so we can have some sort of direction?" I like to steer people to what I call perceptual mapping. That is really where all market research should begin. It begins internally, and that's about a 2 to 3 hour type of kind of facilitated meeting with the stakeholders. It can work one-on-one, like with an entrepreneur, solopreneur, but it's really best if you have 3 or 4 people that have skin in the game, because what we find is for people launching new products, new brands, or new logos, anything that they're wanting to get feedback on, most often internally, they're not on the same page. And internal perceptual mapping helps us recognize the difference between, oh, our perfect client and who our ideal client should and could be, if that
So,
makes sense.
yeah, let's take a step back, I think, before we get into that, because I think people may be listening and going, and I think you even mentioned this, David, is the term market research is not well understood.
Mm-mm.
And what does that mean? But let's take a step back. So let's say that whether you're going to, you're trying to go more online, or you're trying to do more with LinkedIn, or be more recognized, or on social, but that's just one thing, right? You're trying to, again, rise above the noise as your business. What does it mean to do market research? Where should somebody start? And then, yeah, then take us through kind of some of the mapping things that they would do from there.
So as I said earlier about the questions that market research answers, the what, when, where, and how questions, it also focuses on, you got to know how your business, not particularly you and your company, but how businesses like yours are even perceived. And that's where you got to start. So it starts with, what does the market perceive? And that is, what do the competitors perceive about different companies and the services that are offered? What do potential customers perceive, existing customers? And so that involves both a lot of primary research and data analytics, as well as secondary research, because there's a lot of like industry reports, and there's a lot of stuff available that you can research, and AI can come in handy for bits and pieces of this. But to find out how you're really perceived takes one-on-one interviews. And the reason why I personally love that part of my job is, let's just say that the three of us were doing a focus group, and I asked you a question about pricing elasticity, and like, how much would you pay for XYZ? And Tom, you suddenly crossed your arms and sat back. As a live one-on-one, I could say, oh, Tom, it looks like I might have struck a nerve. Have you had some issues with pricing in the past? And it steers me into follow-up questions on the decision tree. So stuff I can get that you just can't get without doing a physical interview. Lots of people think, oh, primary research, I'll just do surveys. Well, yes, that's qualitative in nature, but it doesn't give you great information. That's why I always tell clients, stay away from the star ratings. Someone has 1,000 5-star reviews. What do you do with that information, except it's one piece of data that tells you they might have a good product or service? More interesting are the comments. And this is where AI can really come in handy. Cut and paste 100 different comments. Random. Don't just look for the positive. Get them all. And then with the right prompt, you can actually get out actionable trends that tell you. And what you'll find is they don't always support a 5-star rating. There's always I really love the service, but if they had just done X, it would have been absolutely perfect. But yet they still got a 5-star rating. Or what we learned is, and this was a poll of thousands of people, a lot of people don't like to give 5 stars. Their very best might be 4. So the reason why I'm saying this, it all comes down to what people perceive on anything is what they're going to believe and what they're going to make decisions on. So if you want to change the decision to your product or service or whatever, you've got to change that perception.
David, how so for smaller companies? You talked about solopreneurs. What you just described there sounds expensive. What are some of the things that a smaller company can do to try and discover the same information?
No, and you're right. It can get expensive, especially if you're interviewing. For example, I'm working on a project now where we're going to be interviewing over 100 people one-on-one. And so that's over 100 hours of just interview time, not counting prep or after. So the best advice I give solopreneurs is speak to somebody, get some counsel and direction and map out, and then they can go to, you only need about a dozen people to be statistically significant. Sorry, big data companies, big data mining companies are all probably cringing right now. But the reality is you actually can get a trend from a dozen people if they're the right people. So you've got to make sure that they're the right target people to be getting information from. Make sure that the questions are around how do they feel when they work with you? How do they perceive the way you market your products? What is the way that they perceive your product or service does? These are types of questions, and I work with some solopreneurs just on a 3 or 4 hour consulting contingency, which is definitely worthwhile and much more affordable, and help them map out how they can do kind of a internal and an external perceptual map without having me come in and do it with them. And this way they can speak to family members or they can speak to friends and they can really understand. But the key is to learn how you're perceived. If you do not know that, if you don't know how you're making people feel, marketing is just going to fall flat. You're not going to be as successful. Doesn't mean you won't be successful. It's going to take way longer if you're doing any Google ads, because Google ads, they always tell you it takes 3 or 4 months, right? And the reality is if you get the perception right and you understand what people will respond to and how to kind of manipulate, if you will, that's not a negative word, or I guess persuade or modify that perception, that 3 or 4 months to start getting lots of ad results can be shrunk down to 3 or 4 weeks. It all comes down to really understanding who your ideal client should be. And a lot of times it's not exactly who you expect. And sometimes it's not even who you want.
So first of all, I wanted to hit Bob's comment here about he doesn't give 5 or 10 ratings only. But Bob, I want to remind you to do, and anybody else listening, to do it for the podcast, to always make sure to give a 5 rating for the podcast here.
Especially the guests that are
especially for this episode, right? So, but David, related to what you're saying when you're doing those interviews, and maybe you're talking to a dozen, should you be asking them not just about your company, but about how they perceive the market in general, how they can perceive, and I guess there'd be 2 questions, right? One, who do you perceive are competitors of what I do? Which I think a lot of times you'll get weird answers that you don't expect.
Oh,
right?
It goes even deeper than that, though. It's like I would say, hey, so now that we've discussed who you perceive competitors are, tell me how you perceive their marketing. What's their positioning?
Yeah.
And what do you like about it? What don't you like about it? What would you change? And you get kernels of information, not all of it great, but lots of actionable stuff. So I can go back to the client and say, here's exactly how the market's perceived, how they perceive your competitors, but you're not any of this. And a lot of times they're like, and they didn't even know you. So giant opportunity to interrupt what they're perceiving and position what you have. The other thing, though, that's really important is understanding the dynamics, is like asking people in the one-on-one interviews, where do you see the market going next? What is your perception of that type of growth? A lot of them think, for example, right now, everyone's on this AI. They don't know what to expect, but the perception is they're all going to be out of jobs. There won't be a human element. You won't need to have somebody like me come in. AI is never going to be able, at least in my lifetime, to be able to do what I call the now research. Can it do surveys? Yeah, probably. And it's probably going to get pretty good at that. It's probably going to have some fake version of an avatar that looks real, that can ask you questions and pretend to interact. And it will have lots of decision tree models to go into, but it can't recognize body language. It can't recognize when someone goes, they're looking down, looking away. It takes a good, skilled market research facilitator to say, I can tell I asked you a challenging question. What's causing you some angst here? And you can go off on a tangent and have a little discussion and get even more information.
So what would be included then in that perceptual mapping that you do? So you go through, you ask the questions, what do you end up with? And obviously the next question will be is what do you do with it? But let's stop here on the perceptual mapping. What does that look like? And I think Brandon, I think it's great what you pointed out about the smaller company. Like what can a smaller company do to create maybe a lighter version of that perceptual mapping that still has some value or has hopefully tremendous value that they can use in their next steps?
So this is like the $60,000 question, right? Is how does it all work? And in a nutshell, I'll give you kind of the 3-minute tour. When I do a perceptual map, whether it's with a solo entrepreneur who is focusing on a personal branding business, which I've done a couple of those, or maybe it's a real estate agent who, works in a big office, but, they're all their own LLC, or a large corporate division that's got 15 people attending for a product launch. It's the same process. We start off with, how do we'll have a conversation like the three of us are here and however many thousands are watching on the audience. And Mr. Bob Britton, I hope I'm saying your name right, sir. We start with, how do you perceive the market where you compete? What are some of the things you think are the best strengths it has, the weaknesses it have? How do you perceive it's being served? What are some of the best products you think are out there? How do you think the overall industry in that market is perceived? Like, for example, when I was working with a realtor, she said we're all perceived as used car salesmen. That was a pretty good insight. I personally didn't know that. That was new information for me. And so we went down and you list everything that you can think of how you believe others perceive you, your market, the industry, the product, the service, all of it. And you get this big list. And sometimes it's 15, 20, 25 strong. Then you kind of table that for a minute and you move on to, now let's work on describing the perfect client. If you could paint a picture of who the perfect client is down to what they wear, what do they look like? And, Bob, I noticed in your comments earlier, you said there is no perfect client. So hold on to that thought and I'll share with you why that's so important. So then we'll list out, okay, perfect client. If you're a financial analyst, I've heard someone describe the perfect client is over 55. They're starting to plan for retirement. They've got over $1.5 million net worth. They drive a Range Rover as car number one. The second car is usually a Mercedes or a BMW. They list it all down. Married, 2 kids. Kids are in private school. They shop at Harris Teeter and Fresh Market. Occasionally they'll step into a Publix. They buy their clothes at Neiman Marcus and online, and going all the way down of everything that they perceive is perfect. Then you look at this long list, and I always ask, have you ever sold anything to that person? And every time, 100%, 25 years, it's no. I said, because the perfect client doesn't exist. So now let's move into who you believe your ideal client should be, but we'll do that in a minute. Then the next column is, what does someone actually take away tangible when they do business with you? If you're a personal brand, what do they take away? Well, they take away information on how to, maybe it's optimizing your your profile. Maybe it's how lots of templates on creating content. Maybe it's a strategic approach, but it's something tangible that they can look at time and time again. Or if it's a realtor, it's more than you're just giving them a house. You're giving them a home in the neighborhood. You're giving them a yard. You're giving them a driveway. You list everything of that. Someone walks away tangible. I worked with a pressure washing company not long ago, and they had like 15 different things that they were offering. And by listing every single thing out, it helped us compartmentalize where they need to be focused. So you list all that out. Then the next column is, so when someone does business with you and they get something that they take away, how do you want them to feel? And sometimes it's something as basic as, I feel relieved, David. I'm so relieved for getting to work with you. Or I feel excited because now I've got a strategic approach. Or I feel empowered because the feasibility research told me everything I needed, whatever that is, what I call the feels. But then equally important is, okay, now you know how you want them to feel. How do you want to be perceived, though? And that can be, I want to be perceived as an expert in my field. I want to be perceived as the go-to guy. I want to be perceived as trustworthy, purpose-driven, intentional, whatever that is. We list it all out. This whole process that we're going through takes about an hour and a half. Then we go into the secret sauce. What truly differentiates you? What truly is your value that nobody else is doing? And yes, it's your opinion, but you still got to have one. I'm always dumbfounded at how many people don't know how they're different. Not enough. People will say, well, like I worked with a roofing company and they said, well, we always show up early. We always come in under budget and the work looks exceptional. And I said, you and 15 other reputable roofing companies. That doesn't make you different. What makes you different? What's that secret sauce? Like for me, mine's pretty easy because no one had heard of perceptual mapping before. No one had heard of this proprietary process of how to get all the information necessary to give you the very best chance at success. That is my differentiator. Then we take a break. We come back and say, okay, let's go back to the first thing. Of all those things, what are the two most important? And I always get, David, we got 20. What do you mean the two? I said, no, they're all important, but what are the two most important? Then we narrow it down to two in each one of those like 8 or 9 columns we've gone through. Then take a little break, come back and say, okay, now what is the most important? Then we get that and we put together a positioning sentence. And I ask them, what does that look like though? If that sentence exists, what does it look like? Is it a child giving that information? Is it an adult? Is it a woman? How does their voice sound? And we start talking about different personas. And then we're done with that portion of the meeting. And I take it back to my team. We meet about it and we develop a messaging strategy based on, now we can create a voice and tone that we can go test. Because remember, this is the internal perception.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering is how do you test that, right? It's like what we all think of internally may not be reality.
So now we've got what we believe can be a good voice and tone. And the testing allows us to find out if it's real or if it falls flat and where we need to change. And so this is where we talk to people live. And depending upon the industry, again, 12 people. And for this, one of the things I like to do is a focus group. So we can get it all done in about 90 minutes, bring in 12 people. They get a small stipend, probably $100 a piece. So again, not super expensive. And we discuss everything that we learned on the internal and come out with their perceptions, find out what's right, find out where we're disconnected, go back, meet with the client and say, wow, how you want to be perceived is actually doable. Here's what we learned. How you want to sound, their recommendations, we tweak just a little bit. So it's not just me. It's not just my recommendations. It's not just me saying, hey, and research shows, because that's very medicinal. It's people told me. Your customers, your potential customers are saying they would love to hear it sound like this, look like this. And so what comes out of it, what imagery what type of video, even how loud or soft it should be, how fast should someone lean in or back away. We'll get everything because we ask just questions that no one even thinks of. And some of them are ridiculous. I'll pause sometimes and say, "Hey, everyone, go to the window and tell me the first color you see." And if I hear 6 out of 10 say blue, well, we know that blue is going to resonate. And the whole idea is to listen and watch, carefully observe. So I'm watching the tape or listening back to the tape. I'm very careful not even to provide the tapes to clients, keeping everything neutral and anonymous. I don't get anything other than first names of anyone I interview unless absolutely necessary. And we pay cash and give a receipt on the spot. So they can feel super comfortable to give us real information. No repercussion, no one's going to get hurt, and it's for the greater good. So then now we've got the voice, tone, messaging. I'll go in, the team will make 4 or 5 potential slogans or key messages, just directional, because this now you can take all this information and go to your favorite ad agency and have them really, zhuzh it up and make something special out of it. And they can create the content, look and feel from this information. And this is just for branding and positioning. We do the same thing, same type of thing for feasibility, answering the biggest question, does it make sense? In addition to the 4, it's also, does it even make sense to spend the money to expand or to launch a new product or to develop a new service or whatever?
Brandon, I see you thinking, so I want to give you a chance to ask some questions here.
I did. Yeah. I was going in a couple different directions. I started thinking about my own company, but then I'm like, well, I can't ask those questions right now. I'll ask you those later, David. What are some of the big ahas that companies have experienced through this? Because it sounds like, it's very methodical, and everything I'm tracking with you, you're going to get some real information. And I'm assuming there's going to be a lot of aha,
there is. One of them, it's funny. Bob, who's been giving us great comments in our comment feed, actually hit one of the biggest ahas, and that is the emotional intelligence quote, Q quotient in any go-to-market strategy or positioning is often missing. And that's because they're not getting what's called real or now feel research. And that's where primary research is so important. I'll give you a great little story if you guys can bear with me for a couple minutes on this. I'll try not to be too verbose. A company was competing in a very, very crowded market with lots of different patients from ages 5 all the way to me, 61. And they had a product that they were trying to sell, could be used in every area, and it was floundering. In fact, it had been on the market over 30 years. It was a very mature product, competing with 5 similar compounds. And what had happened was they got away from the who it should be marketed to and the how it should be marketed. So we did perceptual mapping, and what we learned both internally and externally is there's dramatic disconnects, even in the tools they had available. The end result, to kind of tie it up with a bow here, is that we found that the right target base was a child between the ages of basically 5 or 6 and 12. So school-age children. Why? The half-life of the product, the way it wouldn't interfere with dinner and sleeping, and they were their issue was controlled during the entire school day. And the how you marketed to that was they had 2 wonderful studies, one in particular that was just huge at the time, one of the largest studies for that particular ailment. And they weren't using it effectively because they were trying to spread it to everybody. But instead, we focused on just this 5 or 6 to 12 age group. But then we also got 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th graders. We sat them down in a group, and myself and a specialist in this disease area wrote a book called How Do I Feel? Because nobody was asking the actual patient how they felt, not
Wow.
just with their ailment or disorder, but with medication. And so
Mhm.
in this book, we were then able to put together what we called a best start kit. And again, everything was geared towards giving physicians and parents the best chance of success by making sure that their kid, who's going to potentially be taking medication for years, could relate to somebody their own age. And we put together, age appropriate stuff. So kits for the first graders might have a small coloring book and some pencils or stickers, all the way up to 12-year-old might be something a little bit more complex. And what happened was turned a little $45 million product into a $250 million product in 18 months.
Wow.
That's the power of changing perception in marketing.
You know what I heard through all that too is there's so many companies right now in so many crowded fields. I mean, especially the last 15 years, the startup culture has gone ballistic, and so many companies that are hurry to market
Yeah.
to try and find product market fit and all that. And it seems like there's a faster way that feels slower to discover.
Well, no one wants to do the research up front.
Yeah.
We've all heard that phrase. Well, sometimes you just got to fly the plane while you're building it. And I'm just like, that's just BS. It's the wrong way approach. It's kind of like oftentimes I see on LinkedIn something incredibly, it blows my mind actually a lot, because there's some pretty heavy hitters that say this over and over again. That's that you got to work, got to pay your dues, got to work 50, 60 hours a week for 6, 7, 8 years. And you got to fail, and you got to fail often before you're going to see success. And you just got to stick it out and got to keep grinding. And again, I cry BS. And the reason I do that is because, well, perceptual mapping proves otherwise, but there's so many free resources. Um, there's a free video that will show you everything about setting up a business. There's a free video that will show you the key aspects of perceptual management. There's videos that will tell you how to do personal. I mean, anything that you want to learn, you can learn in a few weeks. I'm not saying you'll master it, but you learn it in a few weeks, and then you can actually put together a pretty healthy business plan. But as long as you follow what Bob had suggested, one of our listeners here today, is you got to put the emotional intelligence aspect into it. Do research up front. That combined with the research of learning and gaining the knowledge, and you can launch just about any product, service, personal brand, whatever, and you can start making some money within the first year you're in business. You don't have to grind. I'm not trying to brag. I'm not trying to say I'm better than anybody, because the fact is I've been doing this nearly 38 years. I've been in sales, marketing, and market research. I have been involved in and launched over 70 separate products that are doing over $4 billion in sales, and some of them are still around today. I was involved in the marketing of Zyrtec, which is something I believe just about everyone's heard of, back when it first launched. And I don't say this to impress anyone, but to impress upon people, is that I was definitely not an expert back then, but the things you can learn and become good at, you don't have to be an expert to make money. You have to be an expert to sell the type of services perhaps I'm doing, but there's so many different ways to find information, and it's out there for you. You just got to know where to look.
Mhm. It seems like the process of perceptual mapping is it's just an accelerator. I really appreciated hearing you talk about asking people how they feel. I
Yeah.
feel like too often feelings get poo-pooed, and I think it's the core of everything. Is we know that. I mean, I think when when Matt Dixon was on the show and we were talking about Jolt effect, I have it sitting right here still. But he talked. Their research showed that it was, man, Tom, maybe you can correct me, but it was something like almost 70 some percent of the time, buyers did not make the logical decision, and it may have even been higher than that. Well, what does that mean? Well, they feel something, and then they use logic to support that decision. And yet too often, as we prepare a buyer's journey, we don't think about how did they feel. I'm sorry, the seller's journey, we don't think about how buyers feel in the process. And I mean, we're human beings. We feel everything. It doesn't matter how logical we really want it to be.
Well,
Do you
and
know?
take that one step further, Brandon, and what you were talking about, especially in the startup world. What's a typical startup process? Okay, I got a product. Let's say I'm in the tech industry. I'm going to get you on the phone. I'm going to do a demo. I'm going to logically show you all the things that my demo does and my features and my functions. And then I figure out I can't get anybody on the phone, number one, to even do a demo. And when I do a demo, they don't convert anyway. And then I pivot and then I go to the next one and try. And that goes to the grinding that you were talking about before. Rather than taking a step back and doing what you're just talking about is, okay, well, what are they, the feeling, the logical and the emotional aspect of it would certainly, I think, accelerate a lot of the whole startup or early stage, grinding that we've all kind of lived through at one point in time in our career.
It's interesting because I recently had a client who I thought had a wonderful idea. And oftentimes, if I think they have a wonderful idea, it ends up not testing well. But they had an idea for a new product. And this type of product would not like change the world, but it would certainly make a mother's or an elderly person's life better. It was about doing kind of a light that would shine 360 degrees. You could attach it to a cane or a walker or a wheelchair or a stroller. And it sounded like it could have some legs. And the idea, as it was explained to me, and I'm listening intently. And then I started making my list of usual questions like, okay, how many people have you spoken to? How do you know this is a need? Just because it's a great idea that you had and you've not seen it before, does that mean that anybody even needs it? And how have you asked anyone how they'll feel if they can see 360? Do they need 300? How do you know it's that they need that much? All the questions that I could think of from a research standpoint without having to do any big calculations like chi-square analysis and things like that. And what we found out was it was just an untested idea. Well, so I thought. The woman loved her idea so much that even before enlisting my consultation, she went and had molds made and sent it off to a foreign country and already ordered 8,000 samples. Thinking,
8,000.
if I build it,
Okay.
So I asked her, I said, what material did you use? How much does it weigh? Did you test to see if someone wants it super lightweight? Is it, how long does the battery last? How do you charge it? Is it waterproof? What if it gets lost? Is there any kind of GPS? Hey, help me find it. I mean, none of this had been tested. So the advice I give, it's interesting. Bob, just you're providing comment gold, our listener, Bob, as well as Robert Butch. Grinding only gets people to burn out. Then you're on this hamster wheel and wondering, everyone, there's that saying, I'm the 10-year overnight success. And that used to be something that was important. It used to be a 10-year overnight success, but the reality is it no longer needs to be 10 years. So you have to work at the speed of thought now. So if you have a good idea, you should immediately find someone in market research. Yes, I'm available. And test it. Find out if it's feasible. Find out how it has to be made, where it's going to be made, how long it will take to ship, what type of packaging, what you're going to price that. We do all this stuff. That's one of my favorite things is new product or service development feasibility research. Is so much fun when I can take someone's excitement and hopefully bring it to life and not crush it, but bring it to life, but also bring some insights to it, because you have to find out what someone's going to feel from using the product. If you cannot find that out, then there's no sense making it, because you can't market it. Because if you don't, that's why storytelling, it's so funny. Something else on LinkedIn, and sorry to go off on a quick tangent here. Everyone's talking about how storytelling is the new way of marketing. That's such baloney. Storytelling's been around since I started in my MBA program many years. I took a course on storytelling and marketing. The thing that's changed is how the stories are promoted, whether that's on social media or through a video or through a blog, because they didn't have a lot of blogs back then. Back then, they were white papers and articles. But the storytelling's been around since Aristotle, for God's sakes. Any teacher tells stories. So the story always had to make someone feel something. And what's happened over the past 4 or 5 years, people have gotten away from any type, and that's all emotional intelligence, right? Gotten away from any type of research, thinking if I can be the loudest or the brightest or the shiniest or the most consistent, I will be the best. Well, sometimes it's better to be first and get it right than best and get it wrong.
Ouch. That's a good mic drop right there.
Yeah. And yes, Mitchell, this is being recorded. It's actually on our YouTube channel as well as LinkedIn. So, and by the way, if you go over there, please leave a 5-star review. Just reminding everybody.
And for the guest.
Yeah, for the guest.
That's right. Yeah, no 4s, no 2s,
Yeah,
5s.
no 4s, no. So in the time we have left, time is flowing, is, okay, you get your perceptual mapping nailed down. You at a corporate level, you understand that. How do you roll that out to the sales organization? How do you get the organization to embrace it and incorporate it kind of in the DNA of what they're doing? Because and Brandon, I could see this, people saying, well, yeah, it's great that I go through and I do this quote unquote ivory tower exercise or whatever, but I can't change my organization, or they'll never, I don't know, it'll be too hard to do it. I'm sure you get all these sort of objections, David, when you're doing this. What do you recommend to people to actually make that shift so it becomes actionable, so this perceptual mapping becomes actionable in their business?
So a couple things right up front. When you're doing the perceptual mapping, especially for larger organizations, if you do not include sales in the overall process, you will fail, sadly, because sales sometimes has an adversarial relationship with marketing that's not on purpose. It just happens because a lot of times, I remember even in my early days in marketing and product management in the pharmaceutical industry, it was very adversarial because they thought that, we're just a bunch of MBAs creating shiny, glossy things. No one ever asked them what works best out in the field. So involve them in the process, make sure they're aligned, involve them in, okay, how do we train the great messaging we have? What tools do you need us to make? Okay. We already know the visual. We already know what, so for example, we know that someone is going to respond really well to video. Okay, the sales rep knows the best avenue to deliver that video. They may say, you know what, I'd like to put a 5-slide deck together and have 2 videos embedded in that so I can tell the story and walk them. That level of granularity in allowing them to be part of the creation of the tools they're going to use and how it should be trained is the secret sauce to ensuring that they are all aligned on the same page. Also let them know, hey, this is where we got this information. Marketing didn't make it up. Marketing just interpreted it, and allow them to give feedback on it. How do you tweak it? How do we make it better? What's missing? As long as they're involved early and often, the training will go smoothly, and better yet, out in the field, the delivery will go smoothly.
You got me going. You got me thinking, David. I'm gonna need a conversation with you if you're open to it. I think
of course. Yeah. It's funny. I actually have a really good workshop. It's about 3.5 hours, filled with really good role play exercises. Just did it for a large payment company down in Florida, and it's all about putting EQ into selling. And but I always start off with, here's the messaging that marketing wants. You all tell me how we should deliver it. And that turns into a great brainstorming workshop. And then when we break out, we can talk about, okay, now that you said the how, here are the tools. So, what's the best way to get someone to pay attention. That's, let's say they have their phone and they walk into your booth and they're scrolling and how do you get them to pay attention to you and not the phone and things like that? It's a really good seminar. And it's time well spent. And I've done it for 10 people and I've also done it as much as 1,500. But the key here, involve sales early with marketing in tandem. If there's egos, put them at the door because it doesn't matter. The whole idea is you've got something to sell and you've got a business to promote.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing here, Tom, is that EQ component involved in messaging is everything that we've been talking about for years around content and LinkedIn. Like, how do you use content? And maybe it's your commenting, whether you use a video or a written post. What are the stories and how are you telling those? And what do you bring? Like, I'm a big believer in bringing our humanity into our content. I think some of the best content is when you can marry your humanity with your business expertise and get a story in there, because the humanity part is what resonates with people emotionally. And then you got the story component to add value and help them see, oh, I could add this, I could use this in my business. And maybe I heard it because, it's a hammer in my hand and everything looks like a nail, but I really heard your perceptual mapping is really the way you go about discovering that. Like, how are we going to touch their heart and add value? What is it that they really need to hear, and how do they need to hear it? Does that sound about right? What I took away from today?
Oh, absolutely. And I love how you framed it, putting the humanity into it. And people should not mistake. That doesn't mean you tell someone that, gosh, I had the hardest time growing up and, I was bullied all my life, but I persevered and look what I've been able to achieve. And it doesn't mean that you tell people, I left my high 6-figure job to go all in on myself because I've always on. It's not like that. The humanity is how you actually relate to somebody with your product or service. And that's where the perceptual mapping comes in, because when you know how an industry is perceived and the products or services within that industry, how they are perceived, then you probably got a gazillion stories you didn't even remember that relate, that can touch them. And then the secret sauce here is not just in the telling, it's showing them something visually they can connect with too.
Sorry, I got excited hearing what you were saying there. Yeah, I mean, you're then crafting the lens you want them to see through it.
Yes.
How you deliver it, what you deliver, and all that. Like, and I think, and I can't remember if we talked about this before we went live, or we were talking about before, like, posts that go viral but don't deliver any real value. It's like you can tell certain stories that in a way people are going to go, oh yeah, because they kind of resonate with it. But did you really add value? Did you really tell a story? The woe is me. Oh, I had this childhood, or I went through this. And like, a lot of people can empathize, but are you really adding to, like, what do they do with it? Like, are you really sharing your journey and what you learned in the journey? That adds value to people. But if you just share your journey, people can feel for you, but it doesn't necessarily place in their mind what you deliver, what value you offer, and for them to remember you.
No, that's so important. And again, I don't want anyone to mistake. We're not saying don't do some personal, but just know the difference between, too much information or too deep. I met somebody who owns a incredible marketing agency over in London. And I've actually had her as a guest on a podcast a few weeks back. And she has an incredible journey of her immigration from Romania, right? Now, she brings it back to why should anyone care? And then tells a story of how it helped her create her first post for a client. Well, now that's something people can relate to. So we're not saying don't be personal, but you got to relate it back to the service and business you offer. There's 1,000 people that put in 15 years and grinded it out and worked, 15-hour days until they found the right secret sauce. There's 1,000 of them. And so, yes, you're going to relate to them, but you have to ask yourself, did it take them that long because they didn't know they had different ways of becoming successful? Or was that tons of trial and error? I don't know about you. I get tired just hearing the story. It makes me exhausted. I don't work on Fridays. It's a choice. I probably could make more money and serve more people if I did. But if you want to own, especially if you're an entrepreneur, efficiency is important, right? Targeting is important, but perceptual mapping is where it all begins for every aspect of your business.
So I have a feeling we could go on and on for another couple hours here. But David, before we wrap up, if people want to learn more about you and the perceptual mapping and all that, where should, in fact, I know personally I'd like to read more about perceptual mapping. So where should we go check it out?
So it all starts with perception management, the concept. I actually wrote a book, believe it or not, but the best way to find me is right on LinkedIn, David Rosenberg or Woosh Market Research, and you'll find me pretty quick. And in my features section, you can find a link to the book, link to our website. You can get a one-on-one meeting with me, always free first meeting if you just want to pick my brain. And there is no time limit. It lasts as long as it lasts because I like to get to know people. That's my shtick. My undergrad was in behavioral sociology, which is a great background for all things marketing because it's all about what makes people make a decision. And perception management, I kind of leave everyone with this thought. If you change perception, you change what's possible. It really is that simple.
Yeah. But I think from a pipeline building or sales standpoint and revenue creation, you figure out how to change perception.
Yeah.
The faucet can turn on really high.
And it's never ending.
Right.
You don't do it. It's not a one and done thing. It's something you can do continuously because the market is dynamic, especially in some markets, AI or something like that is dynamic and you want to keep up. You don't always just read and see what someone else is doing. Do the primary research yourself. And again, surveys are a piece of the puzzle, but it doesn't ever match one-on-one discussion.
Right.
Yeah, that's good. David, this was great. I mean, Tom, you were right. We haven't talked about this nearly enough. And I think with the conversations we hear, the topics all the time, the noise, we're not getting through our content, any content, not just LinkedIn, but whether it's YouTube, it's video, it's email,
white papers, articles.
Yeah. I mean, all of it, it's just not producing the fruit that it used to. And I think people are scrambling, trying to figure out what to do next. And I think we've at ad nauseum, Tom, have talked over the last 3 years about the pedal faster strategy. Make more calls, send more emails. And I feel like, I hope anyways, that we're finally getting to a point where people are starting to go, okay, we've burned out 100 employees, 100 salespeople over the last few years that came in, burned out, quit, left, fired, whatever. There's got to be something better.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny when you were talking about the pedal faster, the image that popped in my head, this was my perception, was you're pedaling uphill. If you have plenty of information, all of the right information, you're coasting downhill.
Which is really product, where you hear about product market fit. Yeah. Product market fit is when you're coasting downhill versus when you're pedaling uphill.
And how are you going to know what a minimum viable product is if you didn't ask somebody?
Right.
I know it sounds so simple, and I'm saying it way more simplistic than it is, but to me, this is just basic marketing. It starts with finding out what the market wants, what the market will pay for.
Yeah. And I think your example, isn't that the way Red Bull became a multi-billion-dollar company? It was the guy pushing the rock up the hill. versus
So
Red Bull giving them wings.
it's funny, just real quick. We've all heard of the brand Axe, the deodorant.
Yeah.
When they first launched, it had a young up and coming marketing dude. I cannot remember the exact company. It's escaping me, but I think it's like Levelor or something like that, or Labor. And his idea was, I don't shower every day like I should. Let's market it to the 18 to 24-year-old crowd, particularly those in college. And let's make it, hey, if I wear this, even if I don't look great, women are coming onto me all over the place. And that exploded. It's a $1.6 billion brand.
Wow. Good story. Good emotional connection.
Yeah. Because everyone can picture it. I mean,
yeah. It reminds me of my friend in high school who didn't like showering, so he would just go jump in his pool.
I
like that guy.
All right. Well, thanks again, David. We're going to definitely have you back. I think there's definitely a part 2 that we should be thinking about here.
This was a lot of fun. I would love it if people send in questions. We could have a part 2 and just go straight to those questions.
Yep. So again, thanks again. Brandon, any final thoughts before we wrap here?
No, I mean, I think, yes, the last final thought is go listen to this again, because I think there was a lot of nuggets in there. And even David, as you explained the mapping, my system thinking was going through and kind of mapping it out in my own company and got me really excited. But I think for anybody, go back through and pause it every now and then and start thinking about your 3 tiers. I would believe anybody just goes through that, there's going to be a lot of aha moments that
I think so.
would come out of that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right. Well, until next week, what do we say here?
You know what? I don't remember, honestly, after 137 issues, what is it that Carson says? We'll just say bye to everybody. Thank you, Bob.
Happy modern selling.
Happy modern selling.
Thank you so much, y'all.
All right.
Thank you, David. See you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. We'll see you guys, everyone.